In this video, we'll learn how to create our functions.php file and also learn what a WordPress hook is. In our last lesson, we saw that our theme was missing some important features. For example, we can't come down to appearance and create custom menus, and you'll also notice there are some other things missing here as well, like the ability to add widgets. And that's because we need to add that functionality ourselves in our functions.php file. So we're going to go ahead and create that. So I'm going to just switch back to our text editor. And I'm going to come over in the file pane and just right click and add a new file. And we'll name it functions.php. And WordPress knows to look for this file, and you can think of it as a file that adds plugin-like functionality to your WordPress theme specifically. So any kind of extra functionality or features that we want to support, we'll need to add it here in our functions.php file. So we're going to add our opening PHP tag. And we aren't going to close it because in WordPress's code references and their best practices, they say it's better to leave it off so you don't accidentally leave a trailing space. So we're just going to go ahead and follow that standard for our functions.php file. And then we're going to start by adding a function that's just going to set up our theme. So we want to say, I'm going to create an if statement. And I'm just going to say if this function doesn't already exist, so we have that not operator, so if this doesn't exist, and then we're going to call this just our setup function, so this is going to be glass eye setup. So we're going to say if that doesn't exist, then we're going to actually run our function. So now we'll create the actual function. So it's called glass eye setup, just like we're passing to this function. And then inside of here, we're going to add the theme support to generate the title tag. Because if you remember, we deleted it from our header, but we're not going to get a title tag if we don't tell WordPress to do it for us. So we're going to use a function called add theme support. And what this does is we have a whole list of options in the WordPress developer codex that we can add support to our theme for. So we want to use a specific one, so we're going to add theme support for the generated titles. So the argument we pass to this to get that generated title, so we're going to say title-tag, and then a semicolon. And then right here, I'm just going to add a comment so you remember what this is for. So we're going to say, let WordPress handle the title tags. So it's going to generate them for us. And if you wanted to add additional support for post formats, or if you want to add HTML5 theme support, so WordPress will add some HTML5 elements for you, then we would want to add that here. But we're going to keep this simple for now since we're just learning, and we're just going to add support for a title tag. And since we started an if statement, we want to end our if statement. And now we've created our function, but we need a way for this to get called. And the way we do this in WordPress is we use something called a hook. And what hooks do in WordPress is they allow you to hook into WordPress itself and use your own custom functions just like we created under specific scenarios. And we have two different kinds of hooks in WordPress. We have actions, so we can execute a function when a specific WordPress defined event occurs. Or we can use a filter. So it's going to run our function whenever specific data gets passed through it. And then it's going to output modified data. And without any context, this is probably a bit confusing, but we're going to go back to our functions.php file and use an action to execute our function. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back. And now we have our setup function. But right below here, we want to add an action. So when we're using this add theme support, the only way this is going to work is after a specific action happens in WordPress, after our theme has been set up, then we can run this function to add that theme support. Because if it happens too early or too late, this isn't going to work. So we're going to use a specific function called add action. So it's going to tell WordPress that we're going to use a specific WordPress action. And then we're going to pass it 2 different arguments. So the first one we want to add is a string, and that's going to be the specific action we want to use. And the one we want to use in this scenario is called after setup theme. So this is a WordPress defined event. So it's going to say after setup theme, and then you want to add pass it the name of the function you want to execute whenever this action occurs. So we're going to add a comma, and then we're going to pass it a second argument, which is going to be the name of our function. So we're going to say glasseye setup. So whenever our theme is set up, it's going to run our theme and generate our title tags. So very, very cool. Now that we have that, I want to come in and now actually register our menu. So I'm going to add a comment section here and just tell it that we're going to register our menus. And then we're going to use a custom function once again. So we're going to say function, and we're going to say register glasseye menus. And one thing we want to be careful about here is naming our functions, because if we name this the same as a plugin or another theme or something like that, we might run into a naming collision. So you want to name these very specifically to our theme so we don't run into that. So I'm going to say register my glasseye menus is going to be my custom function. And inside of here, we're going to use a special WordPress function called register nav menus. So that's just register _ nav menus. And what this does is it allows us to pass an array of different menus that we want WordPress to register. And this will allow us to create these menus in our dashboard. So we're going to come in here to our register menus, which I want to add my semicolon here just so I don't forget it. And we're going to pass this an array, which is going to contain our menu information. So inside of this array, we're going to give it 2 key value pairs. And the first is going to be the name of our first menu. So if we come back here to our header.php, we want to pass it this name, or a theme location rather. So you want to tell it that we're going to add support for our primary menu. So we're going to say primary, and then we're going to tell it, we're going to pass this a string, and this is how it's going to display in our actual menu screen and the dashboard. So we're just going to give it a name of how it's going to appear. So we're going to say primary menu, and then comma, and then we're going to pass it our footer menu as well. So once again, if we come in here, or a theme location for that, it's just footer. So we want to tell it where our theme menu is located, so it's in the footer. And then we're just going to call this one footer menu. And make sure we have all of our parentheses closed. And then we want this to happen based on a specific WordPress defined action. So we're going to use another action so our function gets run. So we're going to add an action, and this time we're going to use a special action called init. So as soon as our theme is initialized, we're going to register support for our menus. And then we want to pass it whatever function we want to be executed based on this action. So we want the function we just created. So we want to say register class I menus. Oops, so we don't need the parentheses. And then I'm going to add a semicolon and press save. And so what WordPress is going to do is it's going to look for these different locations. And when we create our menu, it's going to come in here and it's going to be able to recognize where or what location it needs to echo out our menus. So we have our menus in, and I want to add one more thing to our functions.php style sheet. So I'm going to hit Control-C here and just paste it here so we can just change that out. And now I want to do is I want to add our style sheets. So I'm going to say add style sheets. And we might add scripts later, so I'm going to keep this generic. I'm going to create a custom function and I'm just going to call it glass eye scripts. And then in here we're going to enqueue our style sheet, so we're going to say we want WordPress to load these in. So we have a special function that allows us to add style sheets, and it's just wp_enqueue style. And then we're going to pass it 2 arguments here. The first one is going to be a specific name for our style sheet. So I'm going to call my main style sheet just glass eye styles. And then after this, we want to tell it where to look for this style sheet. So we've named it, and then we're going to tell it where to look. And we're going to use a specific function to get just the default style sheet URL. So WordPress knows where to look for the default style sheet, so it's going to look for our main style sheet right here. So we're just registering support for that, and that's get_style sheet _URI. And then I'll add a semicolon. So we've added our main style sheet to the queue. And then we also want to add our Google Fonts style sheet as well. So we're going to use this again. And then we can just call it something like glass eye Google Fonts. And then here we need to pass it the URL that Google gave us. So I'm going to add that semicolon there. And then we're going to come into our header file and we're just going to copy the URL that we got from Google. So I'm going to hit Control-C here and come in here in my functions.php and go ahead and paste that as a second argument so it knows where to load our style sheet from. So I'm going to hit Control-S to save, and we're going to add some comments here. So I'm going to say we're going to enqueue the main style sheet, and then we're also going to enqueue the Google Fonts. Maybe you want to specify Railway. So I'm going to hit Control-S to save here. And we want to do one more thing, and we want to add an action. So we execute our script. So we're going to add an action. And this time our WordPress specific action is going to be WP_enqueue scripts. So when WordPress starts to add the scripts and the style sheets that it wants to load for our site, it's going to go ahead and look for this as well when that action happens. And so we just want to tell it what function we want to run. So we want to tell it to run our glass eye scripts when that happens. So we're going to say glass eye scripts, add our semicolon and save. And now we should go check out our site and see if this is working. So I'm back in the dashboard, and first we'll check to see if our style sheet is being pulled in, since you remember before it was no longer, well, we added it in our header actually. I just realized we forgot to delete it from our header template, so just to make sure this is being pulled in, I'm going to come back to our header.php file, And we'll just want to delete our static link, so now that'll all be dynamically being pulled in. And then we'll come back to our site and come back to our front page, and it looks like our styles are still being pulled in. Awesome. And you can see that now we have our default page that comes with a WordPress installation being added to our footer and our header, meaning it's recognizing the location for our menu as well. So we want to come back to our dashboard, and I'm going to go ahead and we just want to trash that default page. And while we're at it, I'm going to come to the post screen and go ahead and trash that default post as well, because we don't want that pulling in anywhere. And then if we come down to our appearance menus, you can see that now we have this page because we have that support in our theme. So in our next lesson, we're going to go ahead and create our custom menu.